God is greatly glorified when it's demonstrated that the progress of the kingdom does not depend on his servants. God allows nothing to stop the advance of his kingdom. His spirit is relentless.
The material he has to start with has never slowed God's kingdom advance. In John 1, Jesus chose 6 fishermen from the villages of Bethsaida and Capernaum to turn them into fishers of men. It's always God who is the one bringing increase to his kingdom, not his servants.
No changing of the guard thwarts kingdom advance. Just when you think God could never replace a servant of God, he raises up someone more capable. God often honors the first servant, yet gives extra portion of his presence to the replacement.
For example, Moses delivered the Israelites from Egypt, but Joshua led them into the promised land. God honored Moses on the Mount of Transfiguration, yet Joshua completed the mission.
Elijah became one of the first great prophets, yet Elisha had a double portion of his spirit. God honored Elijah on the Mount of Transfiguration, yet Elisha did even greater miracles.
No time of unbelief holds back the kingdom. Whenever generations seem to have lost their fire and things seem dark, God always has a remnant praying and crying out for his kingdom to come. He has never left himself without a faithful generation. Never.
No ruler in history has ever been able to stop the advance of his kingdom. The ploys of man to slow it down backfire. When borders close and missionaries must leave, God uses this to advance his kingdom. Missionaries leaving the million believers in China in the 1950s were shocked to find tens of millions when the doors opened in the 1980s.
No tragedy or unexpected twist in the path slows God down. God uses the death of his servants to propel his kingdom forward. The martyrdom of Stephen in Acts 7 and the consequential persecution scattered the believers throughout Judea and Samaria, preaching the gospel wherever they went, as we see in Acts chapter 8. Some of the apostles, like James in Acts 12, died quickly, while others lived to an old age like John.
You know, the situation of our own illness has not slowed the advance of the kingdom. In the last 5 months of our cancer journey, we've discovered 40 more church planting movements than we knew of before. And there's still so much that we don't know about of the sum total of what God's doing.
We prefer to adopt the mentality of John the Apostle in the last chapter of his gospel. He said, "There are also many other things that Jesus did. Were every one of them to be written down, I suppose that the world itself could not contain the books that would be written."
Just when you think you know the sum total of God's working, he reminds you, the entire world cannot contain the books written about what Jesus is doing. We only know a small part of what God's doing because he's God and we're not. God's work is not dependent on us. Our work is dependent on him.
God is the absolute, all-powerful, sovereign King. His kingdom is the unstoppable gospel of Jesus Christ, fueled by his Holy Spirit. So, let's allow our efforts to match his majesty and trust his Spirit to work things out. Let us, every day, give our utmost for his highest.
And when we are filled with confusion and we don't understand the twists in the path, let's remember that this sovereign King is also a good, loving daddy. On this side of eternity, the twists in the path can confuse. But when we stand on the edge of heaven and look back, they will all make sense.
Our personal hope and plan is to run hard for God's glory for a long, long time. But the uncertainty of the length of those days doesn't affect the relentlessness of God's kingdom.
That's right.
The servants of the king have always been dependent on the king, never the king on the servants, and even their deaths fuel the advance of his kingdom.
And that's the way it should be, so that all glory is given to God and never to his servants. So let's press on toward the fulfillment of the Great Commission in Matthew 24:14. But let's remember that the final harvest of all tongues, tribes, peoples, and nations, it falls in the middle of the unprecedented darkness of the persecutions and tribulation of Matthew 24.
May
God alone receive all glory.
glory.
We love you guys and appreciate you.
Thank you.